Hey guys, Brian here from Thumper Fab. Today I'm going to walk through installing our Thumper Fab headache rack on your Can-Am Defender. For the first step of our installation process, we're going to go ahead and mount our manual switch to our headache rack insert panel. I went ahead and swapped this bracket around as we'd like to mount it on the driver's side. I went ahead and swapped the bracket around on our manual switch. You'll simply slide it through the slot provided in your insert panel, and you'll reuse the hardware provided on your switch. In this case, we have a socket cap screw and a nylon lock nut. We'll feed the socket cap screw through the insert panel and our mounting bracket and cap it off with a lock nut on the back side. With our switch fully fastened to our insert panel, we'll simply place the insert panel into position onto our headache rack frame assembly. As you can see, we installed the rib nuts previously here at Thumper Fab, so when you receive your headache rack, you'll have rivet nuts to simply insert your bolts in. You'll want to repeat this process around the whole headache rack before we move on to the next step. Providing your hardware kit, we've included some rubber trim that you can place under your insert panel if you have any issues with rattling when driving the vehicle down the road. For the next step, we'll go ahead and mount our fairlead and our winch, followed by our cube lights, and get ready to mount the rack to the vehicle. On this rack, we're seeing a little bit of rattling, so I'm going to cut this trim in half and install it in the straight sections between your lower right and your lower left fastener, right centered in between our middle bolt. I'll go ahead and cut this in half with a box knife, peel the backing, and insert it on the tube with the sticky side down, get everything tightened back up, and we can move on to the next step. With our backing tape removed from our rubber trim, we can go ahead and lift our insert panel up to create a gap to slide your trim in. You want to make sure and get it flush with the bottom of your insert panel. You can even push it in just a little bit to make sure that it's not seen from the back of the vehicle. After that, we'll return with our Allen head, get these all tightened up before moving on. With our insert panel fully tight, we can move on to mounting our fairlead to our welded headache rack frame. You'll use the hardware provided in the winch box. Insert the hex head bolt through the fairlead before capping it off on the back side with a washer, a lock washer, and a hex nut. With your bolts started for your fairlead, you can go ahead and tighten them up using a 13mm socket and 13mm wrench. Before we mount our winch to our headache rack frame, I'll go ahead and cut the zip tie provided by the winch manufacturer. That way we have access to our cable. What we'll want to do is turn it to free spool and pull a little bit of slack out so that we can feed it through our fairlead hole before mounting the winch up, so we don't have to fight with it later. You'll slide your winch into the frame before feeding your winch cable through the fairlead, and finally pulling your winch into position and tightening it down with the M6x20 flange head bolts with M6 lock washers. Once you get them all started, you'll tighten them up evenly with a 10mm socket before we move on. With our winch fully tightened, we can move on to mounting our winch stop and our winch hook before we fasten our lights to our headache rack frame before finally mounting it on the vehicle. We'll use the Allen head wrench provided in our winch box to loosen up the button head screws that hold the two halves of the winch stop together. Once you have it all separated, you'll simply slide it over the winch cable before tightening everything back up. With our winch stop fully separated, we can slide it over our winch cable before reinstalling the hardware that'll fasten the two halves together. We'll tighten it up using the Allen wrench provided in the kit, as well as a 10mm socket. With your winch stop fully tightened down on your winch cable, we can go ahead and install our winch hook. You'll slide the clevis through the winch hook and the winch cable before capping it off with our clevis pin that you'll insert through the clevis. And you'll want to go ahead and bend that cotter pin back so that the clevis pin can't slide back through the winch hook. On this installation, we decided to go with our light kit that provides 3-inch pod lights and a harness and switch for rear headache rack. We went ahead and assembled the lights with the brackets and hardware provided in the light box. The last step, we'll insert the hex head bolt through the winch mount plate of the headache rack before capping it off with a lock washer and our hex nut. We'll go ahead and get that all tightened up. We'll be ready to mount the rack to the vehicle. With our lights all tightened up, we can loosely fasten our lower mount brackets to the rack. You'll place it into position and use our long button head screws followed by our fender washers to feed through the headache rack. You'll want to feed all 3 bolts through and loosely tighten them on the back side with our flange lock nut. Make sure not to fully tighten them, as we want the adjustability in the bracket for when we're going to align it on the vehicle. With our lower brackets loosely fastened, with the help of a friend, we'll go ahead and place the headache rack up on the vehicle, starting with our upper mounts before moving on to our lower mounts. With our upper mount bolts started, we can go ahead and fasten our lower mount brackets to the frame. We'll use our M8x20 flange head bolts. Once we get them started, we can return and tighten all our mounting hardware before we move on to wiring. With your lower mount bolts tight, you can do the same on the passenger side before returning and tightening up your upper mounting bolts. And we'll move on to finally tightening up the lower mount brackets. We've gone ahead and connected our wires from our winch contactor box to our winch. We'll take the blue wire to the blue terminal on the winch and the yellow to the yellow terminal on the switch. After that, we went ahead and connected our harness to our lights as well, which you can see we've ran the wires underneath the winch mount plate for a nice clean look that'll power our lights and our winch. And from the back of the vehicle, you won't be able to see any wires. Once you get your wires hooked up to your lights and your winch, we'll move on to the inside of the cab to work on wiring on the inside of the contactor box, as well as our ignition source for the red wire coming from your switch harness. We've gone ahead and routed our switch harness down the driver's side C-pillar, in through the back of the plastic, and we've tied it to this frame that's hidden behind the seats. We'll go ahead and run that to the passenger side, as the blue and black wires in your switch harness will need to tie into our winch contactor box, which will power the manual switch we've mounted on the driver's side of the rear insert panel. Here you can see our switch harness that we ran from the driver's side down to the passenger side to tie into our winch contactor box before running this red wire through the tunnel up towards our bus bar. I've tied it up to this frame behind the seats for a nice clean look. As you can see, it'll be nice and finished and won't be able to be seen once the seats are back in place. With your wires connected to your winch and your lights, we went ahead and rounded down the passenger side of the headache rack frame. If you route your wires on the front side of the headache rack frame, it'll provide a nice clean look. We'll go ahead and run all the way down the inside of this passenger side bracket before coming through the plastics, where we'll mount the contactor box, as well as route the remaining wires up towards the front, tied to our bus bar. We'll route the wires down above the gas tank, and they'll come through the opening in the firewall to the left of the battery. Once we have them inside the cab, we'll get them all routed up and plugged in. On this installation, we've also included our light kit. So we went ahead and routed the wires for our winch and to power our cube lights up the passenger side C-pillar. As you can see, we ran them through the plastic and tied them up to the back of the headache rack frame before moving on to tie into our lights and our winch. You connect the wires to the winch in a color coordinated pattern, yellow to yellow and blue to blue. From our switch harness, we'll have a red wire that we'll need to extend that will run up to the bus bar. As we have the tunnel removed for other accessories to be installed at the same time, we went ahead and routed our red wire up towards the bus bar. This will need to be key on power. So when you have your full tunnel removed, you can zip tie it to some of the other harnesses here. You'll just want to make sure that it's not contacting these aluminum tubes, as hot coolant will be flowing through those, and you don't want to risk burning a wire under your tunnel where you won't be able to see it. Once you have your red wire routed to the front, you can go ahead and tie it up to your harnesses and prepare to run it up behind your dash for a clean fit. What we'll do is we'll tie this red wire in to the hot side of the bus bar behind your center console. This will be an easy accessible key on power that'll only work when the key is turned on, which is exactly what we need for this switch harness red wire. Once we've routed our wires up the passenger side C-pillar up to our winch and got it all hooked up and tied away with zip ties, we can go ahead and move forward with mounting the winch box to the plastic on top of the battery. What we did here is we ground down the groove that's behind the battery so that the eyes of the back of the contactor box will sit flush and allow our screws to grab sufficient amount of plastic to get a nice tight hold. It'll keep it nice in place, but also removable in case you ever need to change your battery out. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and place our battery box up in position, take our small Phillips head screws that'll come in your hardware kit. With our drill, we'll go ahead and fasten it to the plastic right above the battery before I move on to connecting the winch contactor box to our switch harness as well as our battery. Here you can see the blue and black wires that come from our switch harness. This will power our manual switch. You'll plug in the bullet connectors to the corresponding wires coming from your winch contactor box. You go black to black and blue to blue, sliding the green sheathing back over the connections to make sure that you don't have any possibilities of shorting out later on. With our switch wires hooked up, we'll go ahead and connect the large red and black wires that come off your winch box directly to the battery. You'll connect the red to the positive terminal and the black to the negative. We'll simply remove the lock nut that's on the positive side of the battery using a 10mm socket and get ready to tie in our positive and our negative wires. You can also loosen up the negative at the same time. Once we get these hooked up, we're ready to test our winch out and make sure everything works as it should. For the wiring up front for our Thumper Fab headache rack, we'll have a positive and a negative that come from our light harness for your rear cube lights, as well as a red wire that we extended from the winch contactor box. This has to go to key on power. So while we're tying in our light harness, we'll go ahead and tie in for the key on power for your winch contactor box. You'll simply remove your center console panel, which will give us access to the positive and negative terminal of your bus bar. This positive terminal will be key on hot, so it'll be the perfect application for our wire coming from our winch contactor box that has to be key on power. With your winch ignition wire and your light positive and negative wire hooked up to our bus bar, the only thing left for us to do is hook up our switch. We'll hook it up in the order of black, white, and then blue on the switch where the three terminals are in a line. Now just a reminder, this is a key on accessory, so to test the lights, you'll have to turn the key on and flip the switch. As you can see, the switch will light up when the lights are activated. With your wiring all buttoned up, you're ready to hit the trails and enjoy your new Thumper Fab headache rack on your Can-Am Defender.